Let's talk about the oxytocin hormone. Now, there are two primary sites of action of the oxytocin hormone. Now, these being first the mammary gland and the uterus. Now, but these are not the only sites of the action of the oxytocin hormone. Physiologically speaking, there are many other sites or organs where oxytocin exerts its physiologically action. So, in order to study those, the first one is that whenever posterior pituitary hormone secretes the oxytocin, it has effect on the adipose tissue. Now the adipose tissue means the fat tissue. And whenever oxytocin works on the adipose tissue, it has one of the two physiological functions. One is even the biochemical, that it causes the increased lipolysis and causes the increased amount of beta oxidation of the fatty acids. Now, all of these fatty acids are the ones which are actually stored in these adipocytes. And because of the lipolysis, they are released. The other being because the amount of adipocytes has now decreased at a certain area, there is increased amount of adipolectin, that is, there's increased physiological need for adipose tissue to form, and there's decreased amount of leptin hormone. The other sites of action of oxytocin hormones can be it works on the parenchymal tissue of the liver. And whenever it functions on the parenchymal tissue of liver or the skeletal muscles, it works by two of the biochemical changes. One, it increases the insulin sensitivity. The other, it increases the glucose uptake. Now, both of these occur both in the liver parenchymal tissue and in the myocytes of the skeletal muscles. And because of the increased insulin sensitivity, there's increased amount of glucose now being transported from the blood to the cells. So that's why we have increased amount of glucose uptake. And because of this, we have certain other physiological functions too. That being that when oxytocin works on the pancreas, it again has certain actions. Now these can be, when the oxytocin works on them, is there's increased amount of insulin release. So they all work in a harmony. When oxytocin works on the pancreas, there's increased amount of insulin release. And because of the increased insulin release, we have increased insulin sensitivity in the liver and the other tissues. Because of this, the glucose found in the blood is decreased. There's more uptake into the cells, and because of this increased uptake, we have increased amount of both glycogenesis and glucogenesis. So glycolysis starts to happen, glycogenesis start to happen, and oxytocin has an increased amount of control over all of these functions, even though there are certain other hormones and other autocrine and paracrine hormones that have some role in these physiological functions. Oxytocin also takes part in these. Now, whenever we're talking about the functions of an hormone, there are also certain psychological and social functions also involved with an hormone. And oxytocin is a very good example of such functions. Now, for example, when oxytocin works on the brain via its serpentine receptors, there is both emotional response by the patient, and that emotional response can be quantified as there is anxiolysis, or in other way we have decreased amount of anxiety in those patient. There's more positive mood in that patient. So the emotional structure of the patient is lightened. So oxytocin is also sometimes termed as the mood enlightening drug. The other is the social component of its function. Now, socially, oxytocin works by improving the maternal behavior. It even involves in the maternal bonding. The other one is the pair bonding. Now, because of its function in the pair bonding, now pair bonding, even though may be regulated by oxytocin, there is a wide variety of both psychological and physical stimuli that are involved in the pair bonding. And because of its effect on the pair bonding, sometimes oxytocin, even mistakenly, is also termed as the love hormone. The other social one is that it is also involved in the sexual behavior of the humans. So, a decreased amount of oxytocin in any patient will result in decreased libido. The other is the neuroendocrine function of the patient. Now, neuroendocrine function can be termed in both as an anorexia defect, that the patient starts to suffer from anorexia, that there decreased drive to eat in that patient. They also start to suffer from the attenuation of the HPA axis. Now, the HPA axis is the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. So, the transfer of the hormones from the hypothalamus to the pituitary to the adrenal gland, that axis is the one that is most important in our body because it controls almost all of the physiological, biochemical, and stress related functions in our body. Most of the metabolism is controlled by the hypothalamus, pituitary gland, and the adrenal gland in our body. So, any change in that function will result in the change or the attenuation of this axis. Next is the change in the cognition of that function of that patient. So, cognitive changes can result due to the release of oxytocin in a patient. Now, the cognitive functions can be an increased amount of social memory, that patient starts to learn more about the social patterns of the society or the population, and the increased amount of the olfactory memory, the ability to both recognize and remember smells in a patient starts to improve due to the effect of oxytocin in these patient.